I see this constant cat and mouse. The Russians sort of respond with this, and therefore the Ukrainians do that. And for the Ukrainians, keeping the Russians pinned into their naval base and attacking them where they think they're safe, obviously strikes fear into the hearts of the Russian sailors and prevents them operating more widely.
Would really like to get your understanding of what exactly happened with this Russian submarine in Russia's Novorossiysk naval base that Ukraine claims to have sunk with unmanned water vehicles. What do you think the reality is here?
Well, of course, the Russians denied the submarine's been damaged, but they denied everything. They denied Ukraine sank the Moscow 3 years ago. So they lie about everything. But I think for me, there's two or three deductions. I mean, firstly, the Russian fleet is now based in Novorossiysk, not based in Sevastopol. In Crimea, the Russian fleet had to abandon Sevastopol and retreat to the east. And that first opened up, obviously, Ukraine to be able to use the western side of the Black Sea. And then the second thing I'd say is allowing a drone into your now major naval base is a massive breach of failure of security again. And I think it shows complacency and competence by the Russian Navy and the Russian fleet. And thirdly, I think I'd say it shows the sort of growth in the technologies of drones in the air, on the water, underwater. I mean, the Ukrainian Navy, with assistance, has come a very long way in being able to target the Russian ships, submarines in the Black Sea. And now she's getting something with a heavy charge into the main anchorage is again shows where that's got to. And I think we can probably learn quite a lot of lessons from that.
And how much do you think Ukraine's maritime capabilities have developed over this year, particularly using sea baby drones and AI in the Black Sea? But more recently, they're also starting to target oil platforms in the Caspian Sea.
But so war was the mother of invention, and the Ukrainians have showed themselves to be pretty inventive. People say that they managed to target the Russian Black Sea fleet without having their own navy. I mean, I think they've adopted a sea denial strategy. They can't control the Black Sea themselves, but they can deny use of the Black Sea to the Russians. And I think I saw Ukrainian generals say that the cycle of technological advance inside the Ukrainian armed forces generally and at sea is like every 6 months, sort of generational change, which shows how quickly things are evolving. I think we've seen, autonomy, how the drones have gone from being controlled by a person on a controller via satellite link through to being autonomous. That was on the surface. Now, if the Ukrainians have cracked how to do autonomous underwater vehicles going to harbours, then that's another step forward in their development. But I see this constant cat and mouse. The Russians have sort of respond with this, and therefore the Ukrainians do that. And for the Ukrainians, keeping the Russians pinned into their naval base and attacking them where they think they're safe, obviously strikes fear into the hearts of the Russian sailors and prevents them operating more widely.
If we can talk to events today, we're talking on Thursday at 1 o'clock in London time, and vital talks as we are speaking are going ahead in Brussels on financing Ukraine's war effort. It's still no unanimous agreement as we're speaking right now on releasing up to 210 billion euros in frozen Russian assets. Are you optimistic or pessimistic about the outcome perhaps later today as we stand? Do you think, because there's been so many incarnations of trying to get this deal done, is this the last chance?
I mean, firstly, I think, we all know that Ukraine needs money. Without money, Ukraine's going to not be able to pay its people, pay its soldiers, keep supporting troops at the front line and keep the lights on and services going. So this really matters. So the worst case scenario is that Ukraine starts to run out of money next year. It's in a fiscal crisis. I mean, I think there's two ways that Europe's been looking at this. One is to use the Russian assets. I think they talk about 90 billion out of the pot of 210 billion to create the precedent and then be able to use more in due course. Or the second is to use unspent EU funds as part of the budget. I mean, this is a continent with a GDP of $15 trillion or euros. So we're talking about small sums in the great scheme of things, but it's become so totemic. So I think probably if the EU can find ways to assure Belgium in particular that it's met its concerns about legal, financial, economic risk, I think there's a path to be found. It may be a blob of the two options. It might be some use of the Russian assets and it may be some use of the EU unspent funds, and it might be more sanctions being placed on a permanent basis rather than temporary, so they can't get voted down. Other legal assurances. But I worked in the European Union. Every council tends to come to these sort of massive moments, and they all seem to find a way. And I know that Germany wants to find a way, the Commission want to find a way, and I think they probably will, but it will be a very late night, I imagine, with lots of arm twisting and manoeuvring and shenanigans and threats being issued to smaller nations to come into line, including Hungary.
What about the Russian economy? How much pressure do you think it's under at the moment? And are the US secondary sanctions against Rosneft and Lukoil activated and working, the secondary ones? It's claimed that imports by India and China have only gone up in recent weeks.
Well, I mean, again, I'm not a massive economic expert, but I think the Russian economy has endured much better than most analysts expected it to. I mean, obviously, it's got inflationary pressures. They're borrowing heavily. All the money, they're now spending 7% of their GDP on defence. That's money which is not going elsewhere. There's the impact on living standards. But the question for me is, are these sanctions actually affecting the Russian war machine? I think the answer is no, because Russia seems to keep finding a way to divert other money from elsewhere into defence. And secondly, as Russia has moved away from Europe, it's found new markets, in particular in Central Asia with China. So it shows how amorphous, how difficult economic warfare is. I do think that there's more scope for the Americans to take sanctions or take action against the Russian economy. And we'll have to see if the talks break down. Back to your other question, then does Trump bring even more hard sanctions down, in particular the banking sector? But I think looking ahead into 2026, we know that Russia's got economic problems, but they're not quite as acute as Ukraine's financial problems.
And just finally, John, we're fast approaching at the end of the year. If you were to reflect on the effect the Trump administration has had on the war in Ukraine in 2025 and look forward to the effect it may have in 2026, what would you say? What would your assessment be?
Well, I think in 2025, the United States moved officially from a position of supporting Ukraine with arms indefinitely and economic money to trying to bring the thing to an end. I mean, we knew this from Trump before he became elected. He said it at the inauguration. He spent a great amount of political capital trying to bring about a deal. And as I said before, America's still heavily invested in this because it doesn't want to be bogged down, as it sees itself, in a minor European issue. From the American perspective, he wants to concentrate on China and resetting strategic balance with Russia. So if I reflect, I think the key consequence has been for America to shift emphasis for this onto Europe, whether it's with NATO or whether it's Europeans standing up and doing more to support Ukraine. That's why we're having these discussions in Brussels today, because America stopped financial support to Ukraine. That's why NATO and the European countries have to buy US weapons to send them, because America stopped sending weapons directly to Ukraine. So I think what we've seen is a breakout of real hard-nosed, realist machine politic from the White House on Europe and Ukraine, and to a degree Russia. My concern is that Russia has not had the same amount of pain exerted on it as Ukraine has. And I worry about the capricious nature of the White House, who seems to blame, occasionally Trump blames Ukraine for being invaded in the first place, when the blame solely remains on Putin.
And what about looking ahead to 2026?
Beyond 2026, I would say I would expect the Americans to remain engaged. I mean, I expect that the pressure on Ukraine will only intensify. And I think Trump wants something signed by the anniversary of his inauguration in January. I don't think he wants to see it drag on. So although I hope America remains engaged in the process and trying to bring the two sides towards substantive face-to-face discussions, which has been the objective since Alaska, my concern is that he will just wash his hands of it, toss it over to the Europeans to sort out. So I think back to the question about Norway or Lithuania or indeed Europe, keeping the Americans involved, both in NATO and in the process about Ukraine, is absolutely vital for us. we can't do this ourselves for obvious reasons, and we want Americans' involvement in the talks and the process to remain strong.
John, it's been good speaking to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kate.
You've been watching Frontline for Times Radio with me, Kate Chabot. If you'd like to be the first to get exclusive content, you can sign up for membership with the link below. You can also listen to Times Radio for the latest news or read it on thetimes.com.